A quiet night's disturbance. The city's industrial district was eerily silent under the heavy shroud of midnight. Officer Liam Grant cruised slowly down the empty stretch of riverfront road in his patrol car, his headlights cutting through the faint haze that clung to the damp pavement. The district had been abandoned for years, a graveyard of shuttered factories and warehouses, with the occasional sign of petty crime, graffiti, stolen scrap, or illegal gatherings. But tonight, the quiet felt different. It was oppressive, hanging in the air like an unspoken threat. Liam had been on the force for nearly a decade, long enough to recognize when something was out of place. His instincts sharpened as his eyes landed on an odd sight ahead. A battered red sedan parked haphazardly on the shoulder, one wheel up on the curb. The hazard lights blinked at irregular intervals, like a weak pulse. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I've got an abandoned vehicle on Riverfront Road, just past the old steel mill. No driver in sight. Proceeding to investigate," Liam said, his voice steady but focused. The dispatcher responded in her calm tone. "Copy that, Unit 47. Proceed with caution. Backup is available if needed." Liam parked his cruiser a safe distance behind the sedan and stepped out, the chill of the night immediately brushing against his face. His flashlight's beam swept over the vehicle, revealing a dusty windshield, scratched paint, and a license plate that didn't match the state. His gut churned. The windows were grimy, and the interior was dark, save for the occasional flicker of the hazard light's reflection. He tried the driver's door. It was locked. Circling the car, his flashlight caught something peculiar. The trunk lid sat slightly ajar, a thin strip of shadow visible in the gap. He stopped. The air seemed to thicken as his hand hovered over the trunk. His years on the job had taught him that open trunks seldom held anything good. He inhaled deeply, steeling himself, before gripping the edge and lifting it fully. The flashlight's beam landed on a sight that made his breath hitch. A young woman, bound hand and foot with rough rope, gagged with duct tape. Her skin was ghostly pale under the harsh light, her clothes torn and muddied. A bruise bloomed across her cheek, and her lips were dry and cracked. Her chest rose and fell with shallow, labored breaths. "Jesus," Liam whispered, his heart pounding as he instinctively grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need immediate medical assistance and backup at my location. Female victim found in the trunk of an abandoned vehicle, bound, gagged, and unconscious, but alive. Repeat, alive. Copy that, Unit 47. EMTs and backup en route. ETA 5 minutes, the dispatcher replied, her voice no longer calm but edged with urgency. Liam crouched by the trunk, gently pulling the duct tape from the woman's mouth. Her head lolled to the side, and a faint groan escaped her lips. He leaned closer, his voice low but steady. "Miss, can you hear me? You're safe now. Help is coming." Her eyes fluttered open, glazed and unfocused. Her lips moved, forming a single word, barely audible. "Ma. Emma." Liam repeated, leaning closer. "Is that your name? Emma?" Her eyelids drooped, and she slipped back into unconsciousness. Liam placed his jacket under her head and checked her pulse. Weak, but steady. The knot in his chest loosened slightly. He stayed beside her, his flashlight scanning the area for any sign of the perpetrator. The empty street stared back, offering no answers. The distant wail of sirens broke the heavy silence, and Liam stood, waving down the approaching ambulance. 2 paramedics jumped out, their faces tightening when they saw the scene. One crouched by the woman, checking her vitals and attaching an oxygen mask, while the other prepared the stretcher. "She whispered Emma," Liam informed them, stepping back to give them room. "I don't know if it's her name or someone else's." The paramedic nodded, making a note before focusing on stabilizing the woman. "She's critical but alive. We'll do our best." As they loaded her into the ambulance, the first backup unit arrived. A pair of officers stepping out, their expressions shifting from confusion to grim determination when they saw the open trunk. "What do we know?" one of them asked. "Not much," Liam admitted. "No signs of struggle near the car. It might have been dumped here after the fact. Plates are out of state. We need to process this entire scene." One officer nodded, donning gloves to begin photographing and bagging evidence. Liam turned back to the car, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just a case of car theft gone wrong. Someone had left this woman here to be found, or worse, to disappear. The faint smell of gasoline lingered in the air, mingled with a metallic tang that made Liam's stomach turn. Searching the car's interior revealed little of interest: a crumpled fast food bag, an empty bottle of water, and a phone wedged under the passenger seat. The screen was cracked, and it was locked, but it might hold clues. He bagged it carefully. The faint glow of dawn began to creep over the horizon as the tow truck arrived to remove the car. Liam stood back, his hands on his hips, watching as the vehicle was lifted onto the flatbed. His mind kept circling back to the moment he opened the trunk. The image of the woman, her whispered "Emma," and the implications of what she had endured gnawed at him. As the ambulance pulled away, taking the woman to County General, Liam made a silent vow. He didn't know who she was or what had been done to her, but he would find out, and whoever was responsible would pay. The shadows began to stir. The fluorescent lights of the hospital emergency ward buzzed faintly as Officer Liam Grant leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the door to the trauma room. The victim, identified as Emma Price, thanks to the ID found tucked in her jacket pocket, had been rushed into surgery as soon as the ambulance arrived. The medical staff's grim expressions told Liam enough. She was alive, but just barely. "Officer Grant," the soft voice of a nurse broke his trance. He straightened as she approached. "She's out of surgery and in stable condition," the nurse informed him, her tone professional but tinged with sympathy. "She's unconscious, but the doctor said she might regain consciousness within the next few hours." Liam nodded. "Any idea of the extent of her injuries?" The nurse hesitated. "She has several contusions and lacerations, most likely from being bound. There's evidence of dehydration and malnutrition, suggesting she's been held captive for at least a couple of days. The bruising on her ribs and face, it's consistent with blunt force trauma." The knot in Liam's stomach tightened. "Thanks for letting me know. I'll need to speak to her as soon as she's able." The nurse gave a polite nod and returned to her duties, leaving Liam alone with his thoughts. The hospital's quiet hum couldn't drown out the questions swirling in his mind. Who had done this to her? Why was she left alive, but in such a brutal state? And who was Emma? The name tugged at him, nagging like a memory just out of reach. Liam returned to his precinct a few hours later, where the mood was tense. News of the case had spread, and the station was abuzz with activity. Detectives were pulling surveillance footage from nearby streets, combing through databases for the car's registration, and tracing any known associates of Emma Price. Detective Natalie Kerr, a sharp-witted investigator with a knack for finding patterns others missed, was waiting for Liam at his desk. "Grant," she called as he approached, holding up a folder. "I pulled the preliminary report on the car. It's registered to an out-of-state rental company. Stolen 2 weeks ago in Utah. No reports of it crossing state lines, which means whoever took it either swapped plates or kept a low profile." "Figures," Liam muttered, sitting down. "Anything inside point to who might have been driving it?" Natalie handed him a bagged phone, found under the passenger seat. "Techs are trying to unlock it now, but it's a cheap burner. Odds are, whoever used it isn't dumb enough to leave a trail." Liam examined the phone through the plastic, then set it down. "What about the scene?" "Prints, DNA. Partial prints on the trunk latch," Natalie replied. "We're running them now, but don't hold your breath. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. No other prints in the car, no hair, no fibers. It's like they scrubbed it clean." Liam leaned back, frustration building. "So we're looking at someone careful, organized. This wasn't a random act. Natalie nodded. It gets worse. Emma Price wasn't reported missing. Liam frowned. What? A young woman, abducted and held captive, and no one reported it. Her address on file is in a small town about an hour away. We sent officers to check it out, Natalie explained. Turns out, she's been living on her own since college. No close family, no one to notice if she went missing. Quiet life, keeps to herself. The pieces were starting to form a grim picture, but the full image remained elusive. By mid-afternoon, the precinct received a breakthrough. The prints from the trunk matched a name already in their system. Victor Vic Morrow, a local thug with a record for assault, theft, and suspected involvement in human trafficking. He was known for being a runner for bigger players in the city's underbelly, dangerous, but not the mastermind type. Natalie dropped the file on Liam's desk. Vic's last known address is a warehouse on the east side of town. Makes sense for someone trying to stay off the radar. Liam grabbed his jacket. Let's pay him a visit. The drive to the warehouse was quiet, the tension in the air thick. Natalie navigated while Liam reviewed the case notes, his focus narrowing on Vic. If this man had anything to do with Emma's abduction, he wasn't going to get away easily. The warehouse was exactly what Liam expected, dilapidated, with shattered windows and graffiti-covered walls. A few cars were parked haphazardly outside, their owners nowhere to be seen. Liam and Natalie approached cautiously, weapons drawn. They signaled to each other before entering through the side door, the rusted metal creaking loudly. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of stacked crates and broken machinery. The smell of oil and damp wood filled the air. Liam's flashlight swept across the room, revealing scattered debris and signs of recent activity, cigarette butts, an empty beer can, and a tattered jacket draped over a chair. A noise, a faint shuffling, echoed from deeper within. Liam motioned for Natalie to stay low as they moved toward the sound. They turned a corner and found a man crouched near a crate, his back to them. He was rummaging through a duffel bag, muttering under his breath. Victor Morrow, Liam called, his voice firm. The man froze. Police. Hands where I can see them, Natalie added, stepping forward. Victor turned slowly, his hands raised. He was tall and wiry, with unkempt hair and a crooked nose that suggested a history of bar fights. His eyes darted between Liam and Natalie, calculating his next move. "What's this about, officers?" he asked, his tone dripping with false innocence. Liam didn't bite. "You're under arrest for your connection to the abduction and assault of Emma Price. You know exactly what this is about." Victor's smirk faltered for a split second before returning. "Emma who? Never heard of her." "Then you won't mind coming down to the station," Natalie said, stepping forward with cuffs. Victor hesitated, his gaze flicking toward the duffel bag. Liam caught the movement and raised his weapon. "Don't even think about it, Vic." With a resigned sigh, Victor allowed Natalie to cuff him. "You've got the wrong guy," he muttered as they led him outside. "I don't hurt girls." Liam exchanged a glance with Natalie. Victor's words weren't convincing, but the tension in his voice suggested he knew more than he let on. Back at the precinct, Victor sat in the interrogation room, his bravado wavering under the fluorescent lights. Liam leaned against the wall, letting Natalie take the lead. "Here's how this works," Natalie said, sliding a photo of Emma across the table. "We know you were involved. Your prints are on the car. The woman in the trunk barely made it. You don't want to be tied to a murder charge, do you?" Victor stared at the photo, his jaw tightening. "I didn't do this," he growled. "Yeah, I moved the car. But I didn't touch her." "Who did?" Liam pressed, stepping closer. Victor hesitated, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. "Look, I'm just the middleman. The car, it wasn't mine. I was told to move it and ditch it. That's it." "Told by who?" Natalie demanded. Victor shook his head. "You don't get it. These people, they don't leave loose ends. If I talk, I'm dead. Liam leaned in, his voice low but firm. If you don't talk, you're going down for this. You think they'll protect you. You're expendable to them. Victor swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. After a long silence, he muttered, "There's a guy. They call him Drake. Runs things from the shadows. I don't know much, but he's the one calling the shots." Liam exchanged a glance with Natalie. They had a name now. Drake. But this was just the beginning. If Victor's fear was any indication, they were up against more than just a petty criminal. They were about to uncover something much bigger and far more dangerous. The web of deception. The precinct's conference room buzzed with activity as detectives and officers pored over newly acquired evidence. A map of the city was pinned to a corkboard, dotted with colored pushpins marking key locations: Emma's discovery site, the stolen car's recovery point. And now, thanks to Victor's interrogation, several suspected gang hideouts tied to a man known only as Drake. Officer Liam Grant stood at the head of the room, his arms crossed as he addressed the team. "We have a name and a direction. Drake might be the key to this entire operation, but he's elusive. Victor Morrow's testimony gives us a starting point, but we need hard evidence to link this to Emma Price's abduction." Detective Natalie Kerr tapped the map with her pen. Victor mentioned that Drake operates from the shadows, using intermediaries to handle this dirty work. If we want to find him, we'll need to follow the money or the muscle. Liam nodded. We'll hit their known locations one by one, but carefully. If Drake gets wind of this, he'll vanish before we can get close. The first lead: a warehouse of secrets. Later that afternoon, Liam and Natalie prepared for a raid on one of the suspected hideouts, a warehouse near the city's docks. It had a history of minor police activity, mostly for stolen goods, but nothing ever stuck. If this was one of Drake's outposts, it was their best chance at gathering actionable intel. The tactical team assembled outside the warehouse under the cover of dusk. Liam adjusted his Kevlar vest, his eyes scanning the building for any signs of movement. "Everyone knows the drill," he said quietly. "Minimal noise, secure the perimeter, and get everyone inside alive. We need information, not a firefight." With a nod from the team leader, the officers moved in. The entry team breached the side door with a muffled thud, and the group swept inside, weapons drawn. The warehouse was dimly lit, the faint glow of hanging light bulbs casting eerie shadows over the stacks of crates and abandoned machinery. A muffled conversation reached Liam's ears as he led the way toward the back of the building. He signaled for the team to halt, motioning toward the source of the voices. Peering around a stack of crates, he spotted two men hunched over a table covered in scattered cash, burner phones, and what looked like a ledger. "Police, hands where we can see them," Liam shouted, stepping into the open. The two men froze for a split second before bolting in opposite directions. One made a break for the rear exit, only to be intercepted by Natalie, who tackled him to the ground. The other sprinted toward a fire escape ladder, but Liam was faster, grabbing the man's ankle and yanking him down. "Don't move," Liam barked, pinning the suspect to the ground as he cuffed him. With both suspects subdued, the officers began combing through the warehouse. What they found was more than they expected. Hidden compartments in the crates revealed unregistered firearms, fake IDs, and stacks of cash wrapped in plastic. But the real jackpot was the ledger, a handwritten record of transactions, names, and locations. Natalie flipped through the ledger, her eyes narrowing. "This is big, Liam. There's enough here to tie Drake's operation to weapons trafficking and identity forgery. And maybe to Emma's abduction," Liam said. He pointed to a scrawled name in the ledger. "D. Pierce." Natalie tilted her head. "Drake Pierce. Could be an alias," Liam said, "or his real name. Either way, it's the first time we've got something tangible to work with." The victim speaks. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Emma Price began to stir. Her breathing was shallow, her body weak, but her eyes fluttered open for the first time since her rescue. A nurse quickly alerted the attending physician, who then called the precinct. Liam arrived at the hospital just as Emma was being wheeled back to her room from a brief examination. Her eyes were glassy, and her lips trembled as she tried to speak. "Emma," Liam said gently as he stepped to her bedside. "I'm Officer Grant. I found you the other night. You're safe now." Emma's lips moved, but no sound came out. She swallowed hard, and her voice cracked as she whispered, "He left me in the car." Liam leaned closer, his voice calm but urgent. "Who left you? Do you remember his name?" Her brow furrowed as she struggled to recall. "Drake," he called him. "Drake." Liam's heart pounded. The name had surfaced again, this time directly from the victim. He pressed further, careful not to overwhelm her. "Did you see his face? Did he say anything to you?" Emma's eyes filled with tears. "He said no one would find me, that I didn't matter." Liam's jaw tightened as anger bubbled beneath his calm exterior. "You do matter, Emma. We're going to make sure he never hurts anyone again." Her breathing grew labored, and the attending nurse stepped in. "That's enough for now," she said gently. "She needs rest." Liam nodded and stepped back, his mind racing. Emma's fragmented memory confirmed that Drake wasn't just a myth. He was real, and he was dangerous. The syndicate's reach. The next morning, Natalie and Liam reviewed the ledger recovered from the warehouse. One entry stood out, a series of payments marked with initials and dates. Cross-referencing the dates with police records revealed a chilling pattern. The transactions coincided with a string of missing persons cases across the state. "These aren't random payments," Natalie said, tapping the ledger. "They're paying for people." "Human trafficking," Liam said grimly. "And Emma was supposed to be one of them." Natalie's phone buzzed, and she answered it quickly. Her face darkened as she listened. When she hung up, she turned to Liam. "We've got another lead. A dock worker just came forward with information. Says he saw a man matching Drake's description loading crates onto a private yacht 2 nights ago." Liam grabbed his jacket. "Let's move. If Drake's trying to leave the city, this might be our last chance to catch him." A high-stakes confrontation. The docks were quiet as Liam and Natalie arrived with a small tactical team. The informant directed them to a secluded pier where a sleek, black yacht was moored. Its engines idled softly, and faint silhouettes moved on deck. Liam raised his binoculars, scanning the scene. "That's our guy," he muttered, spotting a man with a sharp jawline and dark hair directing others. The tattoo on his hand, a spade with a jagged lightning bolt, was unmistakable. "Drake," Natalie confirmed. "We've got him." The team moved in swiftly, splitting into 2 groups to surround the yacht. Liam and Natalie led the charge, weapons drawn as they approached the gangplank. "Police, hands in the air," Liam shouted. Chaos erupted. Drake's men scrambled, some diving into the water, others reaching for weapons. Drake himself bolted toward the cabin, but Liam was faster, chasing him onto the deck. Drake swung around, brandishing a knife. "You don't know who you're messing with," he growled. "Drop the weapon," Liam ordered, his aim steady. Drake hesitated, his eyes darting toward the edge of the boat. Before he could make a move, Natalie appeared behind him, her weapon trained on his back. "It's over, Drake. Hands up." Realizing he was cornered, Drake dropped the knife and raised his hands. "You think this ends with me?" he sneered. "You don't even know the half of it." Liam cuffed him, his grip firm. "We'll find out soon enough." The arrest of Drake marked a turning point in the case, but Liam knew the fight wasn't over. Emma's ordeal was just one thread in a vast and tangled web. As Drake was taken into custody, Liam silently vowed to keep pulling until the entire operation unraveled, and justice was served. The layers of corruption. The precinct buzzed with tension as Drake was escorted into the interrogation room. Flanked by 2 officers, he wore a smirk that hinted at confidence despite his arrest. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaos his name had caused over the past few days. Liam Grant watched through the observation window, his arms crossed tightly. "He's too relaxed," Liam muttered to Detective Natalie Kerr, who stood beside him. "Either he thinks he's untouchable, or he knows something we don't." Natalie nodded. "He's been running this operation for years, Liam. Guys like him don't crack easy. We need to play this smart." Inside the room, Drake leaned back in the chair, his cuffed hands resting on the table. His gaze was sharp and calculating as he glanced at the mirrored glass. "Let's get this over with," he said, his voice smooth. "I've got places to be." Liam entered the room, placing a file on the table before sitting across from Drake. He stared at the man for a moment, letting the silence weigh on him. Finally, Liam spoke, his tone even but firm. "Drake Pierce, or should I call you David Pierce? You've got quite the resume. Trafficking, weapons smuggling, and now abduction. But it looks like this time you've finally slipped." Drake chuckled, shaking his head. "You've got nothing on me, officer. I'm just a businessman. The things you're accusing me of, pure speculation." Liam opened the file and pulled out photos from the warehouse raid, stacks of cash, weapons, and the ledger linking him to Emma's abduction. He slid them across the table. "Speculation. These look pretty real to me." Drake's smirk faltered for a split second, but he recovered quickly. "Circumstantial. You think I'm the only one in this city with enemies. Someone's setting me up." Liam leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Drake's. "Emma Price. She knows your name. She remembers your voice. And we've got your associates pointing fingers at you. You're going down. Drake, it's just a matter of how hard." For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed Drake's face. "Emma Price," he repeated, almost to himself. "That girl was never supposed to be found." "What do you mean by that?" Liam demanded. Drake smiled thinly. "Nothing. Just that she got lucky. But if you think taking me down will stop this, you're more naive than I thought." Liam's jaw tightened. "So there's more. Who else is involved? Who's pulling the strings?" Drake's smile widened. "You'll never find out. And even if you do, it won't make a difference. You're in way over your head, Officer Grant." The informant's revelation. The interrogation hit a wall, with Drake refusing to say more. Frustrated but determined, Liam and Natalie regrouped in the conference room. They pored over the evidence again, searching for anything they might have missed. Their breakthrough came unexpectedly. One of the men arrested during the warehouse raid, a mid-level gang member named George Alvarez, requested to speak with Liam in exchange for a plea deal. George sat nervously in the interrogation room, his leg bouncing under the table. When Liam entered, George blurted out, "I'll talk, but I want protection. If they find out, I snitch." "You'll get protection," Liam interrupted, "but only if your information checks out. Start talking." George swallowed hard. The girl, Emma, she wasn't just some random target. Drake's crew doesn't work that way. She was leverage. Leverage for what? Liam pressed. George hesitated, then leaned in as if someone might overhear. "Her boss. The guy she works for. He's been pushing to expose some high-level corruption. Big names, politicians, corporate CEOs, you name it. Emma wasn't supposed to be hurt. She was just supposed to send a message." Liam frowned. "Who's her boss?" "Michael Harris," George said. "Investigative journalist. Runs that independent news outlet, the City Chronicle." Liam's mind raced. Michael Harris was a well-known figure in the city, respected for his fearless reporting on organized crime and political scandals. If Emma worked for him, it explained why she was targeted. But it also meant this case was bigger than they'd imagined. The journalist's warning. Later that evening, Liam and Natalie met with Michael Harris at the City Chronicle's modest office. Harris was a tall, wiry man in his 40s, with sharp features and a perpetually furrowed brow. He greeted them cautiously, his eyes flicking to the badges clipped to their belts. I figured someone would come knocking eventually, Harris said, ushering them into his cluttered office. But I didn't think it'd be the cops. Your assistant, Emma Price, was found in the trunk of an abandoned car, Liam said bluntly. She's alive, but she was severely injured. Do you know why someone would target her? Harris' expression darkened. Because of me, he said bitterly. Emma's been helping me with an expose on a massive corruption network. Politicians, law enforcement, organized crime. I knew we were getting close, but I didn't think they'd go after her. Who's they? Natalie asked. Harris ran a hand through his hair. The Deborah Syndicate. They've got their hands in everything. Trafficking, smuggling, even government contracts. Drake is just one of their enforcers. The real power is higher up. Do you have names? Liam asked. Harris hesitated, then pulled the folder from his desk. Not solid proof yet, but these are the people I've been investigating. If I'm right, they've got ties to everyone from city council members to federal agents. Liam flipped through the folder, his stomach sinking. The names included influential figures he never would have suspected. People in positions of power who were supposed to protect the city, not exploit it. This is why they came after Emma, Harris said. She was helping me connect the dots. They must have found out. The mole. The revelation from Harris shook Liam to his core. As they left the office, Natalie turned to him. This goes deep, Liam. If these names are involved, we can't trust anyone, not even our own precinct. Liam nodded grimly. We need to tread carefully. If there's a mole feeding the syndicate information, it could explain why Drake was so confident. Back at the precinct, Liam reviewed the evidence with fresh eyes. A troubling thought crept into his mind. Every time they'd gotten close to a lead, something had gone wrong. Missing files, delayed warrants, botched operations. Someone on the inside was sabotaging their efforts. The following day, Liam and Natalie set a trap. They planted false intel about a safe house tied to the syndicate, carefully monitoring who accessed the information. Hours later, surveillance confirmed their worst fear. An officer from their own precinct, Detective Mark Harlow, was seen entering the supposed safe house and meeting with a known associate of Drake's. The betrayal. Confronting Harlow was one of the hardest things Liam had ever done. The man had been a mentor, a friend, but the evidence was undeniable. In a tense confrontation, Harlow admitted to feeding the syndicate information in exchange for money and protection. "They'll kill me if I talk," Harlow said, his voice shaking as Liam placed him under arrest. "They'll kill you if you don't," Liam replied coldly. "But you made your choice." The clock is ticking. With Harlow's betrayal exposed, Liam and Natalie knew they were running out of time. The syndicate would be scrambling to cover their tracks, and Emma's fragile testimony remained their strongest link to Drake's operation. But the deeper they dug, the more dangerous the game became. The syndicate wasn't just a criminal empire. It was a shadowy force with tendrils in every corner of the city. And as Liam prepared for the next phase of the investigation, he realized one chilling truth. The closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous it became for everyone involved. Into the lion's den. The walls of the precinct seemed to close in as Officer Liam Grant studied the board of interconnected suspects, locations, and evidence. Each line drawn between faces and places formed a sinister web that pointed to one conclusion. The Deborah Syndicate wasn't just powerful, it was entrenched in every corner of the city. Drake Pierce, their current linchpin, had refused to crack during interrogation. Worse, Detective Mark Harlow's betrayal had sown a sense of paranoia within the precinct. Liam couldn't help but wonder if other officers were compromised. The stakes had never been higher, and time was running out. "We need a decisive move," Liam said to Detective Natalie Kerr, his voice resolute. "Something to force their hand. If we wait for them to clean up, we'll lose everything." Natalie crossed her arms, frowning as she stared at the tangled web on the board. "We've taken out some of their players, Drake, Harlow. But the syndicate is bigger than that. If we want to cut the head off this snake, we need to find their leader. Liam nodded. And we don't have time to wait for Drake to start talking. He knows the system. He's stalling, hoping the syndicate will bail him out. Then we make them come to us, Natalie said, her tone sharp with determination. We use Harris's information and Emma's testimony to set a trap. A dangerous bargain. That night, Liam met again with Michael Harris, the investigative journalist whose expose had made Emma a target. Harris was skeptical of the plan Liam and Natalie proposed. "You're talking about drawing them out into the open," Harris said, pacing his small office. "That's like painting a target on all our backs. You know what they're capable of." "They're already targeting us," Liam countered. "They've been one step ahead because we've been reacting to them. It's time to take the fight to them." Harris paused, weighing the risk. "What do you need from me?" "We need you to release part of your story," Natalie said, stepping forward. "Not the whole thing, just enough to scare them. Make them think their secrets are about to come out." Harris hesitated. "They'll come after me." Liam's expression hardened. "We'll protect you. And once they move, we'll have what we need to take them down." Reluctantly, Harris agreed. Over the next 24 hours, his team worked feverishly to prepare a bombshell article, exposing some of the syndicate's lower-level operations and implicating several mid-tier players. It was enough to cause a stir, but not enough to reveal the full extent of the investigation. The syndicate strikes back. The article went live the following evening. Within hours, the city was ablaze with speculation. News outlets picked up the story, and social media erupted with outrage over the alleged ties between the Deborah syndicate and influential figures. The reaction was swift and violent. By midnight, Harris's office was ransacked. Computers were smashed, files destroyed, and a chilling message was scrawled on the wall in red paint. "Stop, or she dies." Liam and Natalie arrived at the scene to find Harris shaken but unharmed. "They're sending a message," Harris said, his voice trembling as he gestured to the vandalism. "They're scared." "Good," Natalie said, her eyes blazing. "Scared means they're desperate." Liam's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was the hospital. Emma Price was awake, and she was ready to talk. Emma's testimony. Liam and Natalie hurried to the hospital, their hearts pounding with anticipation. Emma was sitting up in bed, her face still pale and bruised, but her eyes sharper than they'd been before. She greeted them with a weak smile. "Thank you," she said softly, "for finding me." "We're glad you're safe, Emma," Liam replied. "But we need your help. Anything you remember about your abduction could be the key to stopping the people who did this to you." Emma nodded, her gaze distant as she recounted the harrowing events. "They grabbed me outside my apartment. A van pulled up, and someone, I think it was Drake, said my name. They knew who I was, where I worked." She paused, swallowing hard. "They blindfolded me and drove me somewhere. I don't know where, but I heard water, like a river or a dock." "The warehouse," Liam muttered, exchanging a glance with Natalie. "That matches the location we raided." Emma continued. "They kept saying I was a warning, that my boss was digging too deep. One of them, he was in charge. I never saw his face, but his voice, it was cold. He said my death would send a message if Harris didn't stop." Liam's stomach turned. "What else? Anything you can remember about that man?" Emma closed her eyes, concentrating. "He called himself Vance. I think he was giving orders to Drake." Natalie jotted the name in her notebook. "Vance, another link." "That's not all," Emma added, her voice trembling. "When they thought I was unconscious, I heard them talking about a meeting. They said it was happening soon. Something about settling scores." "When?" Liam pressed. Emma shook her head. "I don't know, but it sounded important." The final piece. With Emma's testimony and Harris's partial exposes stirring the waters, Liam and Natalie had a lead. the mysterious Vance, and the syndicate's upcoming meeting. The challenge was finding out where it would take place. Natalie combed through the ledger they'd recovered from the warehouse, cross-referencing names, dates, and locations. Finally, she found something. A recurring address tied to multiple transactions, a secluded estate on the outskirts of the city, owned by a shell corporation. "This has to be it," Natalie said, showing the file to Liam. "If they're planning a meeting, it'll be here." Liam nodded. "We'll need everything. SWAT, undercover surveillance, and backup ready to move in. This is our chance to take them all down." Into the lion's den. The operation was set for the following night. SWAT teams and plainclothes officers surrounded the estate, using the cover of darkness to blend into the wooded surroundings. Liam and Natalie, dressed in tactical gear, took their positions near the main gate, listening intently to the chatter over their radios. Inside the estate, cars arrived one by one, their headlights cutting through the trees. Men in suits and leather jackets emerged, each greeted by armed guards. The final car, a sleek black SUV, pulled up, and a tall, imposing figure stepped out. His voice carried through the night as he barked orders to his subordinates. "Vance," Liam whispered, his grip tightening on his weapon. Natalie nodded. "We've got him." The officers waited until everyone was inside before moving in. The estate erupted in chaos as the SWAT team breached the doors. Liam and Natalie led the charge, their weapons drawn as they navigated the sprawling property. In the main hall, they found Vance standing at the head of a long table, surrounded by his men. He raised his hands, a sinister smile on his face. "Took you long enough," he said calmly. On the ground, Liam barked, his voice echoing through the room. Vance didn't move. "You think this ends with me?" he sneered. "You've barely scratched the surface." As officers cuffed him, Liam couldn't help but feel the weight of those words. The syndicate was vast, and while they'd taken down key players, the fight was far from over. The fallout. Back at the precinct, Vance's arrest sent shockwaves through the city. Media outlets scrambled to cover the story, and heroism exposed gained even more traction. But as Liam sat at his desk, reviewing the case files, he knew the battle wasn't over. Emma Price would recover, but the scars of her ordeal would linger. Michael Harris continued his work, determined to uncover the full extent of the syndicate's influence. And Liam, though proud of the progress they'd made, couldn't shake the feeling that the syndicate's reach extended further than they could imagine. For now, they had a victory. But the war for justice was just beginning. The shadows strike back. The precinct was buzzing with activity. Officers scrambled to process evidence from the raid, while media vans parked outside clamored for statements about the biggest organized crime bust in the city's history. Vance's capture, alongside a dozen of his top associates, had dealt a crippling blow to the Deborah syndicate. But for Officer Liam Grant, the victory felt incomplete. He sat in a dimly lit conference room with Detective Natalie Kerr, poring over the evidence collected from the estate. The documents, financial records, and communications recovered during the raid painted a chilling picture of the syndicate's vast network. Their reach extended far beyond the city, touching everything from human trafficking to political bribery. But as damning as the evidence was, it was clear that Vance wasn't the top of the pyramid. Natalie leaned back in her chair, her fingers massaging her temples. "We've got enough here to put Vance away for life," she said. "But you're thinking the same thing I am, aren't you?" Liam nodded, his jaw tight. "There's someone above him. Vance's operation was too clean, too calculated. Someone else is pulling the strings." Natalie sighed. "We don't have time to chase ghosts, Liam. The city's watching. The mayor's pressuring the captain to wrap this up with a neat bow and call it a win." Liam's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from Michael Harris. "Meet me at the Chronicle. It's urgent." A disturbing revelation. When Liam arrived at the City Chronicle, the office was eerily quiet. Harris greeted him at the door, his face pale and lined with worry. Without a word, he led Liam to a cluttered desk where several monitors displayed intercepted emails and encrypted messages. "What's this?" Liam asked. Harris tapped the keyboard, bringing up a decrypted message. "It's from one of my sources inside the syndicate," he said. "After your raid, they started scrambling. This message came through an hour ago." Liam leaned in, reading the text. "The raid was expected. Continue cleanup operations. Priority target. Price. She's a loose end." Liam's blood ran cold. "They're going after Emma." Harris nodded. "They're not just tying up loose ends. They're sending a message. If they get to her, anyone else who might talk will think twice." "We need to move her," Liam said, pulling out his phone. "I'll call the captain and get her into protective custody." Harris grabbed his arm, stopping him. "Liam, it's not just Emma. Look at the rest of the message." Harris scrolled down, revealing another chilling line. "Ensure law enforcement presence is neutralized. The mole is still in play." Liam's stomach turned. The syndicate still had someone inside the precinct. "Harlow's in custody," he said, almost to himself. "Who else could it be?" "That's your job to figure out," Harris said, his voice tense. "But first, you need to keep Emma safe." An ambush unfolds. Liam and Natalie rushed to the hospital where Emma was recovering. When they arrived, the scene was already in chaos. Nurses and doctors huddled in corners, whispering frantically. The ward where Emma's room was located was cordoned off by uniformed officers. "What happened?" Liam demanded as he approached the officer in charge. "We had a breach," the officer said, his voice shaky. "3 men disguised as orderlies tried to get to her room. We took 2 down, but 1 got away." Liam's heart pounded as he pushed past the officers and into Emma's room. She was sitting up in bed, visibly shaken but unharmed. "They tried to kill me," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. "One of them. He said they'd never stop." "You're safe now," Liam said firmly, though he wasn't sure how true that was. "We're moving you to a secure location." Natalie stepped in, her phone to her ear. "I've got a safe house ready. We'll take her there now." The safe house. The drive to the safe house was tense. Emma sat in the back seat, clutching a blanket as Liam drove, and Natalie kept a watchful eye on their surroundings. The syndicate's reach had already proven to be vast. Liam couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The safe house was a small, nondescript cabin on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by dense forest. It had been used before to protect witnesses in high-profile cases, and its remote location made it ideal for keeping Emma out of harm's way. Liam and Natalie secured the perimeter before escorting Emma inside. "No one knows we're here except the captain and a handful of trusted officers," Natalie assured her. "You'll be safe." But Emma's fear was palpable. "They're everywhere," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't understand. They don't stop." The mole revealed. As Liam and Natalie settled in for the night, Liam's phone buzzed with a call from the precinct. It was the captain. "We've got a problem," the captain said. "The syndicate just released a statement. They're claiming the raid was a setup orchestrated by the police to protect their own corruption." "That's ridiculous," Liam said. "They're trying to discredit us." "They're doing more than that," the captain said grimly. "We've got reporters swarming the precinct, and I just got word that someone inside leaked classified case files to the media." Liam's grip on the phone tightened. "Who?" There was a pause before the captain answered. "Detective Reynolds." Liam's mind reeled. Detective Sarah Reynolds had been part of the team from the beginning, helping with evidence collection and strategy. She'd always been sharp and reliable, or so he'd thought. "She's gone," the captain added. "Left the precinct an hour ago, and no one can reach her." Liam exchanged a glance with Natalie. "She's the mole," he said. "She's working with the syndicate." A final showdown. As the gravity of Reynolds' betrayal sank in, Liam's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. "You want Reynolds. She's coming for Price." Clocks ticking. Liam's blood ran cold. He immediately turned to Natalie. "We've been set up. They know where the safe house is." Before Natalie could respond, the sound of tires crunching gravel reached their ears. Liam peeked through the window to see two black SUVs pulling up outside. Shadows moved between the trees, closing in on the cabin. "They're here," Liam said, his voice low but steady. "Get Emma into the panic room." Natalie nodded, grabbing Emma and ushering her into the small reinforced room at the back of the cabin. Liam locked the door behind them before taking up a defensive position near the front entrance. The first shot shattered the cabin's window, followed by the splintering of wood as the attackers tried to force their way in. Liam fired back, his training taking over as he calculated every move. Through the chaos, a familiar voice called out, "Grant, drop your weapon." It was Reynolds. She stepped into the doorway, her gun trained on him. "It's over," she said. "Walk away now, and maybe they'll let you live." Liam didn't waver. "You betrayed your badge, Reynolds." "For what? Money? Power?" Reynolds smirked. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about money. It's about survival. You think you can beat them. You're just a pawn in a game you'll never understand." "Maybe," Liam said, "but I'll go down fighting." Before Reynolds could respond, Natalie emerged from the back, catching her off guard. With precision, she disarmed Reynolds and tackled her to the ground. The remaining attackers retreated under the hail of police sirens approaching in the distance. Liam secured Reynolds in cuffs as Natalie checked on Emma, who was shaken but unharmed. Justice for now. The attack on the safe house brought the syndicate's actions into the spotlight. Reynolds' arrest exposed the extent of the corruption within the precinct, and her testimony led to the capture of more syndicate operatives. But the organization's top leaders remained elusive, and Liam knew the fight was far from over. As he sat with Emma in the hospital the next day, she offered him a small, grateful smile. "You saved my life," she said. Liam shook his head. "We just stopped them for now. But we'll keep fighting." And fight he would. For Emma, for justice, and for a city that deserved better than the shadows that threatened to consume it.